Hi, folks. This is Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D., for the Institute for Dialectical Meta-Realism. This is one of those rare times that I have crib notes here, and so that is the reason why I have my glasses on. When I don't need them anymore, I will take them off. The subject is psychoanalysis, a type of psychotherapy which was originated by the German psychotherapist Sigmund Freud. It is a very controversial type of psychotherapy. For one thing, because it is mostly based upon fiction. For example, the Electra complex, which we will come back to in a moment, the Oedipus complex, the id, the superego, all of these different concepts that were proposed by Freud and were employed by him and other psychoanalysts have no empirical basis whatsoever, meaning that there is no evidence that these things actually work. In fact, when psychoanalysis has been compared with other modalities, with other therapeutic techniques, psychoanalysis has been found to work no better or worse than any of the others. In addition, talking to one's friend has been seen to be just as effective, if not in some cases more effective, than receiving psychotherapy, including psychoanalysis. So that's sort of like a pretty much a condemnation of psychoanalysis as a whole. Fortunately, psychotherapy has moved beyond Freud's ideas and has developed in new directions. Another problem with Freud, the concept of the Electra complex. This goes back to what I mentioned before about the fictitious nature of psychoanalysis. There is no such thing as the Electra complex, which most psychotherapists now willingly acknowledge. The idea of the Electra complex is that girls want to have sex with their fathers. In fact, they fantasize about it. They literally want to do it. It is something which is a part of their core yearnings to have sexual relationships with their father. And in some cases are jealous of their mother for having exclusive sexual access to their fathers. Kind of a disgusting idea, but that is the Electra complex. The real problem with that is that Freud's concept of the Electra complex had real life consequences. For example, a girl would be molested by her father. A little girl would go to a psychoanalyst and would report it. And the psychoanalyst would think, oh, this child is fantasizing. This child wants to have sex with her father, but it didn't really happen. As a result of that disgusting assumption, entire generations of fathers were not held accountable for their actions, and entire generations of young girls were not treated, or actually mistreated by the psychiatric establishment. So that is a serious problem, I think, with psychoanalysis. There is a type of thing called neo-psychoanalysis, and most neo-psychoanalysts have tried to take out some of the more objectionable parts to psychoanalysis. In addition, laws have been passed which say it doesn't matter whether you believe in the Electra complex. You are required to report any reports of cases of child abuse to the authorities. And so as a result, psychiatrists and other talk therapists are now obligated to go to the authorities with what this little girl said or that little girl said. It isn't sufficient to simply assume that the girl has fantasized it, which maybe they still believe. I don't know. I can't imagine in our present day a psychiatrist actually believing that a girl would fantasize having sex with her father. That is one of the most disgusting things I have ever heard, and I learned about that many, many years ago. Another thing, Freud was very territorial, very, very territorial about his own form of psychoanalysis. He would bring people, other psychotherapists, into his own inner circle. But if they so much as disagreed with a tiny aspect of Freud's ideas, he would cast them out. That would be the ends of them in terms of Freud's inner circle. And as a result of that, many psychoanalysts found that their practices were destroyed. Some managed to recover it to an extent. Carl Jung, was not affected by it that much because Jung had a practice even before he hooked up with Sigmund Freud. But still, I mean, that's kind of a cruel way to treat people. So Freud had a very low tolerance for dissent. He was very clearly an authoritarian. And many people have argued, in fact, that psychoanalysis itself is really a mirror of Freud's own psyche, meaning psychoanalysis tells us more about Freud than it does about how the average person thinks, feels, and behaves. So that is an argument which some people have made. I am not qualified to question it or just determine whether it is right or wrong, but I will only state it. So, in other words, psychoanalysis is a very problematic approach. There are other newer approaches to psychotherapy which do appear to work considerably better. And that is a blessing, I think, for patients such as myself who saw a child psychiatrist who practiced psychoanalysis, but who now sees another psychiatrist who does not practice psychoanalysis. And he is a really good guy. I do not think I get much out of seeing him, but I see another person who is a psychiatric social worker who practices REBT, Rational Emotive Behavior Therapy, developed by Ellis. And that means he's sort of a cognitive behavioral therapist. And from him, I get a lot more benefit. And I see him approximately every 2 weeks. So in my experience anyway, cognitive behavioral therapy is much more effective than psychoanalysis ever was. When I was growing up, seeing my child psychiatrist, it was no fun. I was literally abused by my child psychiatrist. He sent me to Creedmoor, which is a state hospital, a state psychiatric hospital in New York City, where I stayed for 2.5 months. And during that time, I had 12 ECTs, 12 electroconvulsive therapies, also known as electric shock treatments. The result of that was complete amnesia for a year. I forgot how to do math. I forgot how to read. I forgot how to write. I forgot where I lived. And virtually everything else about me, except my own name, I forgot. It was not until a year later that those memories came back to me. Amazingly, I don't know why this happened or how this happened. I was not left back. And I attribute that to my tutors, who basically kept me up to date with things. And then after a year had passed, I remembered everything again, so that was no longer a serious problem. But because of what my child psychiatrist had done, sending me to get these ECTs, he would periodically, when I was in his office, threaten by saying, if you don't shape up, I will send you back to Creedmoor. Not a very nice guy, kind of an authoritarian personality, maybe a bit like Freud himself. Certainly, my child psychiatrist was a psychoanalyst. Later in life, my understanding is that he left it and moved into a new set of modalities. But when I saw him, he did practice a type of psychoanalysis. So, what I did, I was a very careful observer. I learned not to say anything about my life to him. And I also somehow managed to convince my mother also not to say anything about my life to him. Now, how in the world I did that, I have no idea, because my mother loved him for reasons I cannot understand. Despite all the stories I would tell her, she loved him and she trusted him implicitly. Me, she hated. My mother had this habit of looking at people as either demons or angels. That might be seen as a type, I'm not qualified to diagnose somebody, but as a type of borderline personality disorder that has been suggested to me. But ultimately, you really can't diagnose somebody from afar. You have to actually have that person in your office. But borderline personality disorder is in my family, fortunately, not in me. And so I could see it very well being in my mother. She certainly manifested many of the symptoms of that, including accepting things on the authority of my psychiatrist without questioning to see whether they held any validity. But I got her to keep quiet. Somehow I got her to keep quiet, and I don't know how, but she did. As a result, all of my psychotherapy sessions with my psychiatrist after I came back from Creedmoor were a total and complete waste of time. But he did not know that, because I said that, okay, if that's the new rule, I will simply not tell you anything. And I managed to convince my mother to do the same thing. Somehow, again, I don't know how, but I did convince her to do the same thing. And so my psychiatrist was literally blind. He was blinded by myself and by my mother. My father never had any direct association with my psychiatrist. I wish he would have, since my father would periodically abuse me physically, which I don't understand either. But my childhood was pretty much messed up already. In any event, there is really not that much left of psychoanalysis. There are some psychoanalysts around, but most psychoanalysts today practice what is called neo-psychoanalysis, which means they have taken a lot of the junk that was in psychoanalysis, tossed it off to the side, and created new approaches which modify Freud's ideas. If Freud were still alive, I imagine he would excommunicate them too. But fortunately, he is dead, so we can't do that. For the time being, this has been Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D., for the Institute for Dialectical Metarealism. Have a pleasant day and an even better day tomorrow.